that's going to lead right into this impressionistic group. Yeah, impressionism. Think about it. It uses realist content, but is actually more interested in the form, not the content. Think on it. Impressionists are interested in how one records a painting. But what are they recording, guys? They're recording things that they are observing from, as best they can, real life, to the point of actually going outside and painting nature in front of them as it's happening. Maybe I don't know. Let's just say 50% of the painting right there on the spot. That really wasn't done before the late 1800s. You couldn't do it. Why is that? Because tube paints weren't invented yet. I can take my tube paints, I can take them out into the field, literally, and I can record things that I'm seeing as they're changing right there in front of me. You can't deny the influence of photography, right? Recording things that you can observe, right? Things that you experience. That's photography, straightforward. Japanese prints, I just mentioned talking about Manet and his outlines in that Japanese screen. Japanese prints, I may have an example for us to look at. They're very much stylistically, not only in the way they're making their images. I mean, you can even see it in Van Gogh's work as well. You can see it in Gauguin's work as well. These are later guys, but the influence is strong. They're influencing the style of these impressionist painters, and compositionally as well. I'm gonna have to mention the way they organize the material is very different from an academic sort of classical formal approach. They're going to use some Japanese compositional tools. And then interest in light, most definitely. And if you're talking about a guy maybe like Renoir, you're talking about a guy like Monet, the actual Monet, not Manet. Yeah, they're more or less interested in, hey, whatever the stuff is, great. But I'm actually recording the light as it hits the stuff. So if that happens to be some water lilies, great. If it's some haystacks, great. If it's the front of a building, great. There's some stuff. I'm interested in the light. Again, another video, yeah, I'm using YouTube, connected to my channel, is a really, these aren't very long. It's maybe like 10 minutes. I don't even think it's 10 minutes, but sort of summarizing impressionists. I like that series. I don't get anything like monetarily if you watch it, but they've got good images, a good info. It's sort of like a compressed information. And for what we're doing here, it works out great. And as popular, I like to stress this too, as popular as an Impressionism was or is, it really only existed as a collective group for a very short amount of time. I think it's actually longer. Yeah, I would say 1870s, sure. It didn't end 1880. I think some, maybe 16 years, 1886. I don't know who put the nail in the coffin. I think Monet, he worked into the 1900s. So there's definitely, I just think as a group, about, I don't know, 15, 16 years. But what an impact, right? Let's see. Let's click forward. Whoops. Here we go. So there may be a glitch here. I'm opening up with Monet. This is the painting. If we're wanting to know where does impressionism get its name, it's actually from this piece. What this is called Impression Sunrise, and yeah, that's Monet, not Manet. Impression Sunrise, 1872. Can you go back and think? Think on Bouguereau, even think on Manet. This thing's pretty loose, right? I mean, isn't it really about blue and orange? And am I seeing like bits and pieces of the raw canvas? Like what? This isn't a finished painting. Yeah, this is like the impression of a painting. It's really kind of steam and color, isn't it? That name, the moniker, Impressionism, it came from an art critic. When it saw this piece and some of the other impressionistic pieces, there was a show or in a gallery, I forget. And that label was not a label of positivity. It was a label of negativity. Yipes. But for whatever reason, it stuck. It took. Impressionism is now what we call this group. So it's one of those things that was a derogatory label. Anyway, it does describe it, doesn't it? This is probably what you're thinking of when you're thinking of Monet. Check out these water lilies. Gosh, they are neat to look at. Not going to deny that. They kind of, some of those elements and principles and the science of color and line. And I mean, do these things kind of relax you? They kind of chill you out, right? I could get into some of this. There's no denying Impressionism has a look to it. The mixing of those colors, the palette that he's using, it looks good together. It's like you just can't make a mistake. He's made some, I've seen them, but gosh, not here. I think there's a successfulness to this, and they're void of busyness. I don't want to get into whatever my thoughts, but there's an absence of people. There's an absence of there is no edge to this. It's just where the painting stops. Like, I don't know where I am at in the water. They're very meditative. They are very much about the idea of seeing things. They're not about the actuality of seeing things. Do you see where realism gets to become sort of a complex conversation? Because it's not about the appearance of it. It's about that he is physically there, and this is his sensation of recording the things that he is seeing. Or maybe he's revisiting, maybe he saw it earlier and he's trying to get that whatever is in his head, it's down onto the canvas. But it's not, it's not a lamentation. It's not an enunciation. It's not some sort of biblical this or that. It's not a portrait of a king or a queen, and it's not, it's none of that Baroque or Renaissance or neoclassical. It's not what is it? The death of Sardanapalus and all that, and the Sirius or the Raft of the Medusa. Like, isn't life already hard enough, right? Can I just sit and pause and sort of meditate for a moment on some pleasantness? Anyway, hey, I think that's why impressionistic art is, in a way, it's so popular. It does look good, and it's just a little break, right? Sometimes you just need a little break from all that seriousness. But I'm not looking into water lilies for any sort of like heavy content. Manet was so, he's so serious about like, hey, let's think about this, let's think about that. I don't think Monet is really wanting us to think about like the content. I think he wants us to think about the form. I mean, this is very surface. How does one make a painting? How does one record? that is the conversation. I'm certainly not looking to water lilies or any of the impressionists for that matter for like heavy content. They're trying to beat me over the head with like, oh, think about this. Where are the peasants? Like, oh, okay. Maybe next time. Let me just think on these for a moment. Renoir, I think for sure Renoir is of the same mindset. When I look at, listen, I don't speak French. What is this? Le Moulin de la, I need to get my friend to read this for me. Anyway, this is a dance at a place called the Windmill, and it's some sort of bread. Anyway, the Windmill is a popular location, right, in the city, and the mill would grind the flour, and with the flour, they made these little snacks or lunch treats or whatever. And then people are out, and look, you can see the light coming through the trees, and it's a young group of people, and it's definitely some mixing going on. There's upper class, and I guess this hat must be in fashion because you can almost throw a rock and hit one. And people are chatting and having a good time. And I think Renoir is like, hey, we've had some rough times. We're coming out of, I think I forget what was going on in France in the mid 1800s. Maybe it was another war or something, right? And like, life is rough. Life can be tough. Sometimes we just need to, if we're going to be using art, shouldn't it be something pretty? Shouldn't it be something pleasant? Right? Shouldn't it be something about, something that we can enjoy? And these little lunch things that he's recording here, that's not what he always records, but this is what he's famous for as far as Impressionism goes. Renoir doesn't stay an Impressionist his entire career. I like to look at this one as evidence of, just like I looked at the Eakins, right, the guys jumping off the rocks. I like to look at Renoir's work here, and I see this curious thing happening where he's somewhat cropped. He's cropped the image. He's cropped the painting. And I say cropping of figures such as this only really occurs, I wish I could be like a painting forensic scientist. And it wouldn't be about the chemicals of the paint and all that. That's beyond me. But this evidence of cropping that shows up in these paintings, that means someone has looked at photography, because you don't see it. You don't really see it. They're not constructing paintings prior to photography where people get cropped like this, where you simply just sort of chop them out. That happens when you look through the little window in your camera. Some people make it, some people don't. And therefore they get cropped. That's a horrible example, but you see my point, right? Maybe this was the photo. Maybe that hand, wouldn't that be weird? Like if that was the camera, and be like, well, what's that doing there? Oh, it just got cropped. Well, typically the painter would say, well, then forget that. I'm not going to record that. Here's the painting. But here Renoir says, no, I'm leaving stuff in. Could there be a camera involved? I don't know. Most of these people are models and friends and other artist friends that Renoir has, and they all look like they're having a pretty good time. Nice weather, definitely lunch, sun's out. Young group. I mean, this is about youth. This is about ephemeral moments. Having a good time. This is Impressionism. I'm looking at the palette. It's not a bazillion different colors like what Monet is using. It's actually a handful of colors. Check it out. Give it the old squint test. And you're like, oh yeah, there's really only, I drew all over this, but it's only actually a handful of colors, but it's the way he's treating the edges, right? How he's interested in the light. He's also interested in the activity. I would say this is as much as a good time as these are, except these are water lilies. What's Degas, D-E-G-A-S? What's he up to? Well, I'm saying overall, this is also about orange and blue. Remember when we talked about balance? I'll try not to draw all over this one. But isn't this one strongly informally balanced? Right down the middle, there's almost nothing. And then in this sea of orange, I'm giving this one figure in some sort of blue coat or some sort of blue shawl here. I mean, these are very composed. None of these. I mean, I don't want to get the idea that these are just snapshots. They're not really doing that. They're very sort of deeply thought out about placement. And yes, these, like I said, these are models and these are friends, but I'm fairly certain he got everyone together and put it together. Degas has this, has a feeling of this is that Baroque approach of people not even being aware of his presence, almost to the point of voyeurism. He's just sort of in the corner and he's sketching away, or maybe he's taking a picture, to where they're not paying attention to him anymore. They're not posing for him. You know what I'm saying? You ever done that where you take out your camera and all of a sudden someone starts, putting on their camera face and you're like, like, don't even look over here. Just do what you're doing. Very different. Once people know the camera's on, they send it's artificial. They're not being natural anymore. I think Degas is sitting back long enough to where, people just aren't paying attention to him. And, is that cropping or what? I mean, there's just no excuse for someone, right, constructing an image, a painting where someone gets cut like that, unless they've seen photographs. I'm confident in saying that. I could be completely wrong, but I'm confident. So this is one of these compositional tools, this informal, it should be down in here, this informal balance. That comes from, now I'm not saying that the Japanese print invented informal balance. No, what I'm saying is that the Japanese print, which we're not looking at right now, uses a lot of informal balance, and that is influencing Degas' use of informal balance in his composition. It is definitely informal, right? Rule of thirds, hot spot. All right, there may have been a little breakup there, technology. Hooray. I think I was in the middle of talking about Degas and his use of, I'm going to stress over and over that they're really, a lot of these impressionists are getting their inspiration from non-Western sources, and I'm talking about Japan. And I don't mean ancient Japan. I mean somewhat contextual, current, not too long ago, still from the 1800s, Japanese prints and style, that Japanese tradition. It may trace its roots back to maybe a World's what do they call it? World's Fair today. It would have been a World's Exposition in the 1800s. It may be from importing goods from Japan, and then the goods, maybe a bowl or a plate, but then whatever's surrounding the goods could have been a Japanese print or a discarded Japanese, some sort of paper product to protect the item as it was shipped, at this time around the big world. And you'd get your bowl or whatever, and you'd, throw that away, and you'd try to press out that paper to see what was on it. Anyway, it wasn't that big of a struggle, but there's a very curious, what do you want to call it? It's a fad. It's a trend. It was very popular. And these artists that we're looking at, including Renoir, including Monet, most certainly including Degas, are gaining inspiration or getting inspiration from these Japanese sources. The point here being not afraid of these asymmetrical, you can also call it informal, you remember that, compositions, such as what Degas is using here. Note that the perspective here, we're definitely not part of the scene. We are observing the scene. I wouldn't necessarily call this one an aerial perspective, but it doesn't really seem as if we're on the ground level. We're definitely sort of up. Compare yourself to the stair to the side there. I think a true bird's eye perspective would be a bit taller. And then the spaces being emptied of all but abstract elements of color and line. Just not being afraid of that. Think back to your Romantic, your Neoclassical, your Baroque, your Renaissance compositions. And I just, as strange as maybe as Caravaggio was, or as dynamic as Michelangelo or even Raphael, think of the School of Athens. Those things are pretty compact. There's a lot going on. And I'm not saying there's a fear of negative space, but let's face it, in the middle, dead center of this painting by Degas, before we move forward, there's nothing. It's emptiness. Who does that? This is definitely an influence from the outside. Non-Western influences. There's a couple of terms on there. This Japonisme, which I'm probably butchering in pronunciation, but that's that trend of this fascination, this influence of Japanese style in Western Europe at the time. Japonisme is, I think that's the word we should use. These are my, actually, if I'm going to talk about Degas again, Degas was actually of course, a world-class pastel. Now I was going to say a pastel drawings, but you actually don't call pastel drawings. You call them pastel paintings. I'm not making up the rules. I'm just telling you. Well, 3 of these are actual Degas pastel paintings, and one I'm throwing in a Japanese print to show you, yes, these are bathers. You keep having this tradition of the bather show up in art. Most definitely, that's a Western tradition. Go all the way back to ancient Greece. Okay. Now this is also about realism. These bathers, or most probably, this is scenes from a bordello, right? As Degas would frequent. Sure. So that's context. That's historical. It's factual. It's realist, right? Type of stuff. I'm recording things I can observe for myself. And then there's this, where we can't leave it out, the component of the impressionist, of what he's doing with his pastel. By the way, what is pastel? Pastel is like adult crayons, right? It's expensive, highly pigmented. They come in a chalk form, which is somewhat powdery. And then there's an oil pastel as well. I have to tell you, I am not a fan of oil pastel. I just find that it just makes a huge mess. That's just on my end. You may have a different opinion. Chalk pastels I've actually messed around with, and I can get into some of that. But either way, yeah, they're very intensely pigmented chalks and crayons, and they're called pastels. I'm including that Japanese print to say and remind us again, yeah, there's also this Eastern outside influence. These prints, these Edo era prints, actually aren't that old. We're talking maybe 1850s, you know, and when is Degas working? 1860s, 1870s, 1880s, right? We're 20 years old. So these aren't ancient works. They're just fascinated with them. And yeah, she's a bather. So he's drawing inspiration again from the outside. And when you put these prints next to the Western examples to try to make that visual connection of like, this is really what you're being influenced by, it's kind of eye-opening. And we could go down the list with Monet. You can definitely do that with Degas. You can definitely go through these impressionists and say, hey, listen. It's sort of like hearing a song and the person next to you doesn't understand that it's, you know, possibly a remake or it heavily borrows from another hit they just didn't know about. I'm telling you, these Japanese prints, there's this very strong connection to not only the content, right, but also in many ways the form with the outlines and with the composition as well. Oh, here we go. I feel as if am I going to get my point across? Here are a couple more. No, that's, I think, yeah, that's got to be a Degas up there at the top. This color on this isn't all that great. That's his pastel painting, right? and that's next to a Japanese print. Now she may be a geisha, she may be, you know, an actress. You say actress anymore, or is it just actor? Anyway, this idea of Japanism, right? This influence of the East into the Western art world is a word. I'm going to read it. To describe the study of Japanese art, more specifically, its influence on what European works. And then I'm going to butcher this as well. Ukiyo-e. I believe you don't pronounce the E and E, you say A. Ukiyo-e. I could be wrong. Literally means pictures of the floating world, right? Describes the urban lifestyle, especially the pleasure-seeking. There should be some in quotes in there. The pleasure-seeking aspects of life. I looked at ukiyo-e prints as, yeah, sort of like everyday people doing everyday stuff, but just in Japan. You know, people like washing their hair or bathing or, you know, getting dressed. I most definitely love the bridge print there at the lower right. And then, you know, Monet, he builds his own garden. That's a Monet there in the bottom left. Definitely Japanese inspired content, borrowing heavily from composition, lots of borrowing going on here. Now, yeah, printmaking as well. I believe Degas is a printmaker. I know Mary Cassatt, big American impressionist and female, big time printmaker, big into the prints. And they have, again, this sort of this word Japanisme is not a word I use every day, but this is what's actually occurring here in the Impressionist movement. And for better or for worse, it is something that continues as we talk. We're going to see that, yeah, the Impressionists, they influence the next bunch coming right up behind them. And yeah, that's the post-impressionists. This group, this post-impressionist group, just simply means that the next sort of big movement after Impressionism. Yeah, they're going to continue to experiment with, you know, how one makes a painting, right? With technique, style, color. I break this group into two separate families. One is the group that's really interested in the how-to, the science, the form of making things. How does one make a painting? The separate group would be the post-impressionists who create images that are intensely intimate. It is really about themselves and their experiences. I can't say, if I were to go back and maybe revisit Renoir or look at Monet, is that they're actually talking about themselves. I don't really think Degas is talking about himself. Or if I were to have shown a Cassatt, don't get mad, I didn't show one. I don't feel as if they're really talking about themselves and their own experiences. I think they're talking about this stuff they see. Now you could say, well, yeah, well, Degas, maybe he was going to the horse races, or he was going to the opera, or, you know, here's someone on a boat. I think their main concern was to try to record that stuff and then use all their little, you know, if it's influence of photography, influence of Japanese prints and all that, and synthesizing all those things together. The second family inside the post-impressionist group, I feel, is really just talking about themselves, not just things that they see, things that they are truly experiencing. Can you say then, oh, well then Reed, then you're talking that post-impressionists in a way are a branch of realism? And I would say, yeah, if they're really talking about things that they can observe and things that they experience, yeah, in a way. And I think I stressed it enough when I first introduced the idea that realism really, it sticks around. I don't feel as if realism is ever going to go away. I don't feel as if the impact of the camera is ever going to go away. And although Impressionism was such a small movement as far as years are concerned, I think the impact there are still these groups that say, well, yeah, that this is, how does one make a painting, and what are my influences? Maybe they're not impressionistic, but at least they get you to think about those things. So anyway, in short, two separate groups here. I'm going to open, and I know you've seen some of these guys, right? This is Seurat, George Seurat. This is Sunday Afternoon on the Isle of Le Grand Jatte. Pointillism is the term here, pointillism. This, yeah, don't adjust your screens. This is dots, lots of, pick a number, it better be big, lots of dots of color. And when I place these dots of color closely together, let's say if I were to put a yellow next to a red, and then you walked away 20 feet or something, I think optically mixing, you would see some sort of form of orange if I do my dots and my math correctly. Seurat is interested in the math of painting. There's too much improvisation. There is too much intuition when you're working with the impressionistic artists. I mean, if you think that stuff's easy, try it. I think Monet only ever had like 8 tubes of paint his entire career. He did that whole, that's the same, not saying he only had 8 tubes of paint, the same 8 colors maybe. And by the way, none of them were black. Yeah, ponder that just for a moment. Yeah, we're talking about Monet. Like what? The guy was truly like a master wizard working with just a fixed set of colors. He could just make anything with it. Whereas Seurat's not digging that. It's like, no. There's got to be a math to it. I'm not going to be, painting color wizard. I'm going to come up with formula. I want to lock it down. I want to make it practical. And so, yeah, Sunday Afternoon on the Isle of Le Grand Jatte is, let's just say this isn't the only one, but this is sort of like his big solution to the problem of fixing and locking down all that intuitive, right, wizardry that Degas and Monet and Renoir were pulling off. By the way, not every time. If you dig in deep enough, every once in a while you'll find a Monet and you're like, meh, not so great. No, they weren't all home runs. But yeah, the ones, of course, that end up in books and on the computer and stuff, they're expensive. And, and the bad ones, it's kind of like pizza. Even bad pizza is pretty good. But I hate to say they're bad. There are just some that are better than others. And Seurat just simply doesn't like that. Now, is Sunday Afternoon on the Isle of Grand Jatte, is this, something, are we really seeing something that Seurat is just so desperate to tell us about, some sort of experience, some sort of self-expression? I hope that's not what you're thinking, because that's not what's going on here. Everything is very composed, fixed, locked down. There's nothing here left to chance, right? In fact, I think this is a huge painting. It's like 14 feet long in Chicago Art Institute, if you want to go see it. Yeah, nothing left to chance here, right? 2 years, I think it took to make this thing. Can you imagine with all the dots? Is there any sort of content here? I think, if you get into it, I think, it does show sort of the stages of to womanhood. You have, isn't there an infant here? Wasn't there a baby somewhere? I know she's pretty young. Someone's got to, maybe I've gone blank. Anyway, she's pretty young. And then, you get these kids playing, and you get to like adolescence and like a young lady. And then here's possibly, a teenager and her friend, and here's young and single, and it keeps going. Here's a nurse, and she's older. You can kind of get that. Maybe there's some sort of circular thing going on here. She's definitely, the monkey gives it away. I don't think, I'm just remembering my pen doesn't show up unless I make marks. This is iconography. When you see monkeys, she's walking a monkey, a pet monkey. That's somewhat a signifier that she's a prostitute. I hate to keep the theme isn't prostitution. It's just sort of like, this is a thing. Yeah, I guess you go to, where's the luncheon on the grass, right? Where's Manet? That's a joke. Anyway, apparently these parks are a happening place. Definitely, she's fishing if you can't tell what she's doing, but even that's sort of like a signifier, like that's like she's fishing for men. There is this subversive conversation that's sort of embedded in Sunday Afternoon, but I don't know. I don't see the point in talking about that. I don't want to ruin it for you. I believe Seurat also died of syphilis, by the way. I think I just ruined it, but whatever. That's the 1800s. Hey, okay, Cézanne. Here's what I want to say about Cézanne, and then we're going to move forward, okay? And that everything I just said about Seurat, Cézanne is not messing with dots of paint or anything like that. That's crazy. He is methodically thinking about how one makes. What is the math? And he is looking into nature. Here's my point. Cézanne looks into nature and he wants to see the geometry of nature. Okay? So think for a moment. If I start simplifying nature into its geometric forms, in a way, I'm talking about abstraction. Is Cézanne an abstract artist? And the answer to that is no. But he is the first guy to start asking these questions. And you see evidence of these ideas showing up even in a painting such as this, which is, like, hey, this is not, this isn't a very sort of spectacular religious narrative or anything. You're never going to see one of those again, by the way. But if I pay attention and I understand what Cézanne was up to, I'm noticing that he's shifting the view, the point of view, to where the edge of his table is somewhat like, what happened, right? Where did it go? That's a pretty good line for, I'm using a mouse. And you may think, well, that's just a mistake. Well, he does it again here. He does it on the front of the table, underneath this magic tablecloth. My table shifts pretty hard. I just don't know, like, what things aren't adding up. It's as if he's thrown the table upright, like we've gone back to the 1400s and we got people, they can't figure out perspective. That illusion of depth really doesn't seem to be as much a concern as him trying to record the information possibly from different vantage points, physically not moving the stuff, but moving himself and recording. And apples, they become sphere, and bottle, it becomes cylinder. This bread or whatever this is, these are cylinders. He's simplifying and he's moving and he's trying to record. Does that make him abstract? No. When I look at later paintings by Cézanne and I see that he is compressing space and his brush marks are getting very geometric. How else would you describe these? They're very boxy, rectilinear. Can I say that? They're very geometric, okay? And that depth doesn't really seem to be a concern he's bothering himself with. I'm seeing some of the first elements of abstraction. Now, if you're interested in painting, right? I mean, you took an art appreciation course. This is what we're talking about. Is how art, where it is today, just didn't sort of happen. It starts with these people sort of pushing ideas. And Cézanne is definitely one of these people. And when we do get to abstraction, such as Matisse and Picasso, I'll say it then, but I'm going to say it now. Those guys were looking to Cézanne first. In fact, you'll see when we look at Picasso, you're going to say, oh yeah, this is a guy that picks up where Cézanne leaves off. And then we've got Matisse and Picasso coming up with actual abstraction, right? So let's just, to put it shortly, Cézanne, he asks the question, right? He never really finds the solution. It's going to be a few years later, Picasso and Matisse, they're going to find the answers to the questions. And they say, Cézanne, right? Cézanne, they say he is the father of abstraction. But I would never call him, Cézanne, the painter, an abstract artist. No. You can't do that. All right, so what do you want me to say about Van Gogh? What do you want to say about Van Gogh? Say something. I can't hear you. Hey, did I mention these guys are interested in Japanese prints? What's that? You know some stuff about Van Gogh. Yeah, I included one of these. He's got lots of self-portraits. This is the one where he's bandaged his ear up. Yes, very popular question. Yes is the answer. He cut off his ear, I guess with a knife, and I think he wrapped it up in a handkerchief or put it in an envelope. I don't know, and then he gave it to someone. The guy was not well. I don't want to make light of the situation. Oh, yeah, this is good. Let's pause here. Do you think Van Gogh liked Japanese prints? What? Here's the actual Japanese print here on the left. Here is a Van Gogh painting here on the right. Now, he doesn't know how to read, neither do I, by the way, Japanese. He's sort of copied this stuff off of some other, but look, he's even included like the little marks on the, you see, he's included that. He has no clue as to what it's saying. Who knows? It could be like, you know, a grocery list. I don't even know. I wish I could find, maybe I should get someone that can read Japanese. Maybe it does read something. But yeah. And when is that print on the left? Does it say on there? Yeah, 1857. Van Gogh's working in the 1880s. So these things aren't ancient things. They're just super popular. I'm glad that was there. So you knew this was coming. We got to talk about Starry Night. But the point is that Van Gogh belongs to the post-impressionist group that is intensely talking about themselves and their experiences. This is different than Monet, right? I hope you can see that. I hope you respect that Van Gogh is talking about himself. It's not just a pretty view, all right? This isn't Seurat, where it's all about math and placement. And I mean, it's wonderful composition, very informal, all that stuff. If you want to break it down, we can do it. Those curved lines in the skies and the blues and the yellows and oranges, right? Very, very compelling. A simple, what do we call that? It's a color complement, right? Kind of calms you down and relaxes you, right? Starry Night, 1889. I've seen this in person, by the way, if you're interested. Do I get bonus points for that? Here's the story. Anytime you start talking about Van Gogh, it's just the same as his interest in prints, or the same as, yeah, I'm looking at his ear. I'm like, well, that's a story. Starry Night is also a story, or any of the other paintings. You end up having to talk about, you know, so much about Van Gogh because if you've looked at any of his paintings, they tell you about he is trying to tell you, right, his experience. And in a way, he's trying to get you to feel the same way. Maybe, success, yes, no. What they don't tell you about Starry Night is this is a view outside of his asylum window. This is a guy that has checked himself into a mental hospital. And I don't want to romanticize about mental illness or any of that. It's 2020, right? But Van Gogh, I think in today's language, was bipolar or manic depressive, right? I'm not very knowledgeable about any of that stuff to a great degree, but his mental state, he had rough moments, and then he had these moments. He would have manic moments where he would paint, and he'd have these depressive moments where he would, you know, he harmed himself. He cut off his own ear. He also was, you know, he substance abuse with drinking and absinthe. Gosh, we're going to bring up syphilis again. Yeah, he was fairly syphilitic, which I know, you know, messes with your mind as well. I don't know. I've read, right? Let me clear that up. So, and again, I don't want to romanticize that, but there's, you know, a lot about Van Gogh, and students typically ask, oh, well, did he, you know, it's because he was eating his paints, or that he was constantly high and this is what he saw. And I'm like, well, no, actually it's just, you know, good old fashioned, you know, manic depressive bipolarness combined with, you know, living in the 1800s, combined with a guy that would self-medicate, you know, with drinking and, you know, who knows, absinthe? Is that like liquid heroin or something? I don't think you could buy that stuff here in the States. At least I have no idea, but it's like a hallucinogen. And no, I don't think people get high in paint, because it's not like you can do one of these paintings in an evening. Um, Although Van Gogh in his manic phases he would stay up 3 days in a row, and he would work. Um, so Starry Night again is really locked into Van Gogh's biography. This view outside of his asylum window. That's a cypress tree here on the left. Down here would have been the graveyard. There'd be tombstones right outside the hospital. He's overlooking the town below, and you've got a guy looking out onto the cemetery. These cypress trees are traditional trees you would plant in a cemetery. If you ever heard of the highway to heaven, this is the antenna. This is the pathway into the heavens. And if you know, a little bit about Van Gogh and his struggles to have meaningful relationships here in his life, and you know that he eventually does commit suicide, you see that Starry Night is really, it's a guy contemplating his own demise. And again, I'm not trying to romanticize suicide or mental illness or anything. I don't want to prolong this conversation about the tormented artist and you got to be some sort of Van Gogh in order to find success. That's absolutely not true. In fact, there's been studies that show just the opposite, that people that suffer, such as the way Van Gogh did, their output is very sorry. And when they're suffering the most, and it's when they're level that they actually produce the best. Maybe not as proficiently, but it's a good quality work. That gets thrown out a lot. I think that also falls into literature a little bit. You hear about, Edgar Allan Poe, let's say, what was his, like, Opium, and how he must have been stoned when he wrote all the poems. It's like, no, actually, he was probably pretty sober. I don't know of any stoned people sitting around writing poetry, not good poetry, at least, right? So, to my point, not trying to elevate, romanticize any of that. My point being is that this version of post-impressionism is linked to Van Gogh. In order to know this, you must know Van Gogh. And this isn't just about math. This isn't, are we talking about, Van Gogh's trying to compress space, or he's trying to abstract? No, he's not interested in doing any of that. He's using color, he's using line, he's using movement, he's using composition to express himself and get you to also feel something. And that's why I feel like many of Van Gogh's paintings are successes, because they work, they do it. Paul Gauguin, this may be a name that you're not familiar with, but Paul Gauguin, he and Vincent van Gogh actually roomed together one summer. I forget for how long. Anyway, Gauguin, he left. I wonder why. Gauguin, this is a different conversation about Paul Gauguin, in that, yes, he belongs to the same group. I'm grouping him in with the Van Gogh group. And that when you look at Gauguin's work, you're having to talk about Gauguin and his experiences. That's Gauguin. He sees himself, he's kind of, neither Van Gogh or Gauguin started out early as painters. Van Gogh, I think, started out as a minister. Obviously didn't work out for him, and I think it was in his 30s. It couldn't have been his late 20s, but I know Van Gogh in his 30s begins painting. Paul Gauguin, very much the same story. Paul was a stockbroker, French stockbroker, and pretty successful. And I think there must have been a stock market crash at some point that sort of pushed him more. And he was dabbling. He was a weekend painter. But for whatever reason, he decided, hey, painting, that's what I'm going to be doing full time. And you're thinking, hey, now that's cool. That's something I can get behind. Like, go pursue your passions. Well, in doing so, long story short, Gauguin eventually moves to Tahiti, which is also awesome. And like, whoa, I want to do that. Well, he leaves behind his wife, and I think he's got like 4 or 5 kids. Who knows, right? They'd been married 11 or 12 years. See, I'm going to Tahiti. Like, okay, well, yeah, things happen. Well, then while he's there, I believe he either marries or whatever you want to call it, a Tahitian girl. She's 14 years old. So this is the point of that telling of that story, is like, well, can we still appreciate the art by someone like Gauguin, knowing that he was really, as far as like his private life, was just a train wreck, right? If not, in today's, like, you really can't do stuff like that today, I'd like to point out. I don't think you were supposed to be doing stuff like that in 1892. Anyway, that's the story. And, we can make comparisons, we can make parallels. I think in pop music, right? Some of our favorite pop artists or comedians, right? They get outed. Someone tells a story and like, oh man, this guy's a creep, or this guy's a freako. And you're like, wow, I hate to hear that, because man, those songs, you can really, you can really dance to them. So, I mean, I don't know. Can we still appreciate the music and say, hey, yeah, but the person is just a complete disaster? That's where I am with Gauguin. I still like his paintings, but I can't say as I'd like want to sit down and eat dinner with him. He sounds like a real jerk. I'm going to single out this, which I am not going to read it in that. I'm going to say in English. When Will You Marry? ? 1892. That sold for a record of 210 million in 2014. That's fairly recent. That's a lot of money. So you might not know Gauguin. Someone knows Gauguin, and man, is his work expensive? Now, that's a different conversation. Does it, being expensive make it good? Nah. It means he's popular. What makes him part of this expressive post-impressionist group is that, yeah, he is. I mean, listen, we're in Tahiti, are we not? This is about this is about Gauguin's experiences. He has decided that Europe is corrupt, right? That's rich, isn't it? Europe's corrupt. So he decides he needs to go someplace pure. He sees Tahiti as sort of like this new Eden, right? He sees himself as somewhat of a new Adam, right? Do you get all this? There's an apple and a serpent and all this, right? Because he's so awesome. And then I guess his wife, and I should remember her name, but I cannot. She's like the new Eve, and I believe one of these girls is, or maybe her. I think that may be her in the Western costume. And then the colors he's choosing, they symbolize the place. They're not actually records of the place. So yeah, the ground wasn't gold and the sky wasn't, yellow gold and all this. He's choosing colors that he feels best represents or symbolizes the place, as opposed to their actual color, which is a fairly new and impactful idea. If we keep going with this conversation, yeah, Gauguin, he influences the next group. So maybe that's why his work's so expensive. Did I mention he has syphilis as well? It seems like syphilis is the theme, right? Gauguin brings syphilis to Tahiti. How about that? So here we go. All right. I know some of you are waiting, and you've got your pen in hand and you're thinking, when is this guy going to start talking to me about printmaking? Because that is really all I'm here for, is to learn more about these fascinating printmaking techniques. Well, listen, the wait is over. I'm going to talk about Toulouse-Lautrec, the printer. Yeah, he's part of this post-impressionist group. I'm not sure where to lump him. I guess I'm going to lump him into, well, I mean, yeah, these are, well, I don't know where to put him. He's not Van Gogh, and he's not Seurat the Dot, that's for sure. He's not Cézanne. We're just going to put him in his own category. He's a printmaker. He is very wealthy. He's wealthy like Degas was wealthy. I think Toulouse-Lautrec loosely related to royalties somewhere down the line. Anyway, he didn't have to make art to make a living, but he liked the night scene. And so a lot of these posters, right, that he's making using this printmaking technique that I'll talk about here in just a moment, are advertising the nightlife. And I'm talking about the late nightlife, the dancing, the drinking, the partying, right? So these posters for these parties and shows and dance halls. If you know of someone, or if you've ever seen a poster for sale, you know, commercial art as a type of fine art, that actually owes its existence. The whole idea goes back to Toulouse-Lautrec. I find that interesting because I had friends, well, they're still friends. I don't know if they still collect posters, but that they liked that commercial art. They like graphic art in general, right? And anyway, late 1800s, post-impressionist Toulouse-Lautrec. These are prints. What type of print is he doing? It's this new one, and it's called lithography. You can say lithography, but I like saying lithography because people who pay attention are like, oh, that means stone, and that means to write. Stone writing. I'm not using wood. I'm not using metal. I am, in fact, using a stone, like a limestone block. What? It's somewhat complex. There's some steps involved. There is a little YouTube video. I think it's worth watching. And by the way, I'm gonna send this to you guys through our announcement. So if you or you can just, you know, jot all that, whatever that is, down and visit it. But it gives you a sort of a very, very quick history of lithography, and then they actually make one. And we're talking about the space of 5 minutes. It's not a big deal. Who invented stone printing, lithography? I wonder if that's worth knowing, he said, says the guy that makes the tests. Anyway, stone printing, used to make prints at a commercial level. Because, you know, wood, a relief block, is good and as awesome as they are, you know, it's organic. It'll break down. It has its limitations. You could say the same for metal, even, you know, an etching or an engraving. As far as like commercial level printing, you know, if you really want to make thousands of something, I don't think a metal plate, it just seems like you would have a lot of upkeep on that. And maybe possibly being worn down going through the press. But the stone, I mean, you're talking about a pretty durable surface. And it's a different setup. It relies on sort of a wax resist, I suppose is what you would call it, where the ink sticks to certain places in the stone and it won't stick into other places. And then, you know, you have to watch the video, right? Me describing it is a complete waste of time. I've been in the room with lithography and I still didn't understand it. So probably me trying to explain it is not the best idea. That's why they created YouTube. So check that out. I think you'll find it interesting. I wouldn't put it there just to waste your time. All right, so here is this next wave. We're going to call this wave the French Expressionist group. And these guys are going to be the inheritors of everything you just witnessed, from Impressionism, all the way back to realism, all the way back to photography, all the way back to the post-impressionists. I didn't do that in order, but you get my point. This French Expressionist group were called the Fauves, F-A-U-V-E-S. Fauvism is the movement. What's a fauve? A fauve in English is a monster, is a beast, a wild beast. How about that? I want to join the art painting club. I want to be the new fauve, the new wild beast. Probably, I don't know. Yeah, to me that sounds kind of like cool. It's it's a label that was not, you know, here we go with the labels. It seems like these labels that are meant to cut down the movement, such as Impressionism, right? they tend to stick around. And so the fauve, yeah, it stuck around. And so this early French expressionist group, who, by the way, what are they painting? They're pretty wild with the color, right? I wonder where they're getting that from. Gauguin. They're pretty hard with those edges and those lines. Where are they getting that stuff? Japanese prints, probably from Impressionism, right? And then what is their content? Yeah, it's things that they're seeing. These are snapshots, right? Interior rooms, there's some sort of cityscape there. I like that the sky is on fire, right? I think what they're doing is what's called arbitrary color. That is to say, the artist is who chooses the color, not nature, right? The artist picks. I tell the truth. I'm the one telling the story. Guess who's part of this fauve group? Guess who's a fauve? Yeah, Matisse. Young Matisse. This is the lady with the green stripe. I'm going to tell you, it's Mademoiselle Matisse. This is Matisse's wife. Is that green stripe showing up for you guys? I've seen different images where the stripe shows up better. Anyway, she's got a stripe running down the middle of her face. This approach, this sort of brutal, sort of rough approach. And again, Gauguin is a strong influence here. Gauguin liked sort of this, it used to be called a primitive style, just sort of bold and aggressively apply. Look at the paint and the strokes. You can see why they're calling this guy a wild beast. He's really fooling around with color, and he's used Mademoiselle Matisse as the stuff on which to record. I'm not sure if he's so interested in that this looks like her, or, you know, do I even know if it's a likeness? I don't really care. It needs to stand on its own as a painting. I don't know her. What do I care if it looks like her? So yeah, this was shocking at the time. We're talking 1906. Right? What's right around the corner? If I start with Cézanne and I say, hey, you know, this illusion of depth, that's not such a, I'm not really that interested in it. And then I get Gauguin saying, well, you know, nature, it's great and everything, but color to me needs to represent other things, you know, this idea of symbolist color. And then I get Matisse looking at that and saying, yeah, if depth's not important and color is pretty much my choice, you can see I've got the recipe for what's coming next, and that's going to be abstraction. You know, if I were to paint this today, you'd all think I was a jerk or something. But in 1905, 1906, this again, this is groundbreaking stuff. Here it is, Henry Matisse, Harmony in Red, 1908. Let's say for us, this is our first, let's call it abstract, right? Now, it may not be for you, like, well, I thought abstract was going to be something different. Yeah, it's going to get to be something different, and you'll wish for the good old days. But here, what has Matisse done? Well, if you're looking, if you're in front of your laptop or in front of your computer, look for that delete key. Now, don't hit it. It'll probably mess something up. But Matisse is clicking that delete key as when he's thinking about how one makes a painting. When he's looking at Mademoiselle Matisse, or the lady with the green stripe, it's like, what can I reduce this to where it's still sort of understandably the thing, but I've truly have simplified it. Delete. You know, Matisse to me is interesting because for me, he's one of the first guys where, you know, let's say someone's coming and look at your painting, and, you know, your wife is standing right there, and they're like, hey, this doesn't really look anything like your wife. And, you know, Matisse would be the type of guy to say, well, that's weird you would say that, because I wanted it to look like a painting. I'm not trying to, you know, my wife is my wife. And by the way, aren't there cameras? Like, what, you know, can a camera do what I'm doing? Can a camera do this? No. Like, it's not, I'm past all that. I'm not interested in, like, you know, yeah, great. I'm looking to simplify. And when I see Harmony in Red, I'm getting the patterns, right? That Japanisme approach of patterning, the black outline, right? Red must be on sale, right? Harmony and red. But look, the flat wall also, I mean, am I given any understanding of the flatness of the table? It's just so flat. And the female figure there, she's like a paper cutout. It's so flat with the hard edged outlines. And I look out the window and I'm looking for some distance, and it's not really, it's very flat. These images seem blown out. Oh, that's better. It's my screen. He is simplified. He is deleting. Could he delete more? Oh, sure. You can delete more. We're not there yet. You can delete a lot. There's a ways to go before you get to where, like, man, you've deleted too much. But this is early step into these ideas of abstraction. I'm showing you these to compare contrast, and not in any sort of like in-depth formal contrast. I'm just showing you a Matisse from 1897, and then the dessert, and then the one we just saw, the Harmony in Red, that's 1908. That's 10 years later, 11 years later. And you're thinking, oh, I see. Matisse, he's hit his head. No. Would we really be talking about Matisse had Matisse stayed 1897 Matisse? I think two things here. Firstly, Matisse and many of these artists that we talk about that are about to get into abstraction and non-objective and things like that, they know how to paint, right? As I think some of you in general understand, like, oh, well, you know, there is this sort of stylist, this approach to painting where things make sense and they add up and all this great. Yeah, that's what 1897 Matisse, he could do it, right? Number two is that because he could do that, the reason we talk about Matisse is because of 1908 Matisse. And that here is someone that's willing to push the boundaries like Manet did with content, right? And a little bit with form, with his style. This is really someone sitting down and saying, yeah, there's something new to be done here. Can you imagine how hard that is to come up with something new, right? Wouldn't that be a challenge? That should be, I should ask that earlier. Can you come up with a new approach, a new art movement? It's tricky. I mean, listen, we're 100 years later after this guy. We have to take everything into account. Well, so did he. And most of these people in the 1900s, they're inventors. You know, we look at Da Vinci and Michelangelo and Raphael and all those other guys, not because they stayed and did the same work as their boss. We didn't look at Frank Lloyd Wright because he did the same stuff as his bosses, because they ventured out and did something new. Now, whether you like this stuff or not, that's up to you. But I do want you to understand that there is the idea, well, ideas are worth something. And doing something new is difficult. Taking a chance is difficult. And there are many of us out here that would be just fine being 1897 Matisse. Heck, I'd like to be 1897 Matisse, right? I dig that too. But man, if I could come up with a new idea, there's some value to that, right? Think on it. So yeah. So our next guy, I'm just going to click, boom, Picasso, because Picasso is part of this abstract conversation. His version of abstraction is called Cubism, right? To put it plain and simple. So you can say Cubism is just a form of abstraction. That is called analytical abstraction. He also comes up with another form of abstraction called synthetic abstraction. We don't call it synthetic abstraction. Today, you call that collage. Did you know that Picasso is the inventor of collage? So if anything, you've walked away knowing at least that collage is an invention, and Picasso, of all people, is the inventor of it. All right, so there's a picture of Picasso. There he is. Ta-da. I don't know why it's there. I know why this is here. Did you know that this is, I'm going to call it is it a pastel? Gosh, I'm looking, I'm going to say it's a pastel. Did you know this is a pastel painting by Picasso? Like, oh, I didn't know Picasso did work like this. Why, yes, he did. Unfortunately, he was doing it when he was about 15 years old. Oh, Professor, you mean to say that Picasso could do stuff like this when he was a kid? Yes, he was an art prodigy. He could do stuff like this as a child. So yeah, I'm going to show this to you just to get it out of the way, just so you think that Picasso was like, well, I mean, was he as good as 1897 Matisse? Better than 1897 Matisse. But he got that out of his system before he was in his late teens. He was knocking this stuff out. So is that what makes him famous? No, it's stuff like this that makes him famous. And to remind you that Picasso and Matisse are both looking back, right? If I didn't know better, right, that to me really looks like a Cézanne. I'm going to say Cézanne. I flip back and forth. That looks, I mean, Picasso is looking at the work of Cézanne. And he's saying, okay, I see what he's trying to do. He's flattening out these spaces. It's very sort of blocky. It's geometric. I'm going to take it to this next level, which is kind of getting kind of weird. It's kind of getting spacey, very geometric. It's almost like a still life of like wooden blocks. And then I finally take it to this level and I'm like, whoa, right? Tap the brakes. Like, what the heck? What am I even looking at anymore? Picasso, you've taken this analytical cubism too far, this analytical abstraction. Yipes. And don't look to me for the answers. I don't know what I'm looking at either. I think it's a guy playing a guitar, to be honest with you. But it's not like you squint your eyes and the thing clicks into place. It doesn't. If you know the rules of what he's doing, this analytical cubism, there's a list. And he says, well, first of all, you got to have multiple points of view. Well, that sounds familiar because I think Cézanne was trying that. And he says, well, you got to ring it of its color because color means something's more important than the other. Like, okay, no color, monochromatic. Well, then negative space is just as important as positive space. Got it. Well, then you shuffle the deck and you put it all together and, like here's the guy playing a guitar. And like, okay. To prove that point, here is the artist Brock following the same rules. He's working in a separate studio, but he's working together with Picasso. If you were to show me a Brock painting in this true analytical cubist style, I wouldn't know it was a Brock. I would think it was a Picasso, right? I mean, following the rules, those are the rules. I wonder if we were to print out the rules and for us to sit in the studio, would we actually achieve this as well? Who knows, right? Maybe we could. But just to say that this is about process. This is about following rules. This is about thinking analytical, right? It's a mental approach. Cameras can't do this. I remember one of my professors brought up the fact that X-rays had recently become a thing right around the time Picasso was doing these analytical cubist images. I hate to say they're X-rays, but maybe there's something to that. I wonder if there's a connection. That'd be an interesting paper. Like, hey, this is actually, there's an influence of X-ray technology. I don't want to get into that, but it does kind of resemble the idea of, seeing everything all at once, right? Multiple points of view and everything is equal. And anyway, analytical cubism. If you take it back a step, you get this approach, Picasso's approach to abstraction. This is, I'm going to say the Ladies of Avignon. It's Les Demoiselles, the Ladies of Avignon. This is 1907. Are you guys keeping up with the fact that these are so like turn of the century? These are so modern. Even today, they're like, man, it screams of modernness and contemporariness. It's still ahead of its time. I've seen this in person too, by the way, just so you know. It looks exactly the same as it does on your screen. I'm just kidding. It's a bit bigger. Although the date here is a little misleading. Yeah, it was finished in 1907, but Picasso invited some friends over to come and see the new work, and Matisse was in that group. And Matisse, 1907, Matisse tells Picasso, listen, you're taking it too far. You've been fooling around with your analytical cubism, and yeah, you can do it to a still life, you can do it to a landscape, you can mess around with it with portraits, but you've applied it to the nude figure. Oh no. The nude figure at the time was sort of like the last sacred content that no one really ever fooled around with. Picasso didn't care, right? And so, but he did listen to Matisse's advice, and he turned this to the wall. And I don't think the public, us, we didn't get to see it until about 1927. And by then, it wasn't as shocking because more abstract pieces and artists had been releasing their work, putting their work forward, and it become, I don't want to call it mainstream, but as far as the art world was concerned, yeah. In 1927, it was a little, probably still shocking in 1927, but it wouldn't have gotten you like, can you get excommunicated from the art world? That probably would have happened to Picasso. They would have just thrown him out. So what's going on here in the Ladies of Avignon? They seem to have that same facial expression as my Olympia does in Manet's work, where they're really not here, although it seems to be somewhat of a pose down. And yeah, there's nudity and all that, but there seems to be an unfriendliness about it, that they're not just here just for us to gaze, although it's odd because Picasso knows his iconography. Yeah, we've got some fruit that you pluck and peel here. We know what that means, right? Fill in the blanks. Go back. Look at your notes. Yeah, we're talking about prostitution again. Where is he getting the influences from? You have to go back to, it's Gauguin and this idea of this, I don't want to call it primitive, but this sort of aggressive style. Gauguin is looking to, the Polynesian and Tahitian styles and incorporating it into his work. He was also a printmaker as well as a carver, a sculptor. And they have this sort of aggressive, sort of rough aesthetic to them. Well, other Western artists were getting non-Western influences. Let's not forget about Impressionists looking towards Japan. Picasso is no different. He is looking for influences outside of Western Europe. Where does he go? Picasso goes to Africa, specifically Egypt, with the sideways poses, right? The very flatness, some of the profile, but with the frontal eye. Did anyone pick up on that? This one specifically. That's very Egyptian, right? This is a very Egyptian pose, 1 foot forward, right? I hate to draw all over this. It certainly isn't going to add anything to it for me to draw on it. He's also going to sub-Saharan Africa, and I'm looking to these figures over here with their masks. This one here, and of course this one up here as well. He's going to African influences. It's not a Western sense of beauty. He's abandoned the Western sense of beauty, and he's gone to African influences. She's my favorite of the bunch here, right? Her official name to me is the Squatter, right? She's got like, remember that I made you say his name is Ongre, is interested in backs. This is definitely her backside here, but she's somehow turned her head around, right? Like the Exorcist, and is glaring back at us, right? Like, hey, I don't understand the vibe here. Am I supposed to be looking? Am I scared? It's very aggressive. Every angle here, if you're going to talk about the psychology of line and color, it's really just blues and reds. But look at all, remember when we talked about these sort of angular, it makes you think that something aggressive, something dangerous is happening here. This is not the Venus of Urbino. This is not some female figure laying back, looking back at us coyly and letting us observe her beauty. And it's no, this Picasso. This is not what this is about. This is the female as monster, as aggressive, and it's presented to us as such. All right, so some would say that Picasso's masterpiece is this piece, Guernica, 1937. And if there were a piece that if there were a book for our class and it had to have a cover piece to it, you know what? I would probably, this would definitely be like top 3 of the pieces that should go there, because it really does tie together so many of the things that we've talked about so far. First of all, this is huge. I think it's like 21 feet long in its length. It's a mural, right? This isn't something that you can hang on your wall, maybe as a poster, but the physical size of this thing is ginormous. It's huge. So it goes back to this idea, all the way back to the beginning of animals, right? The bull is shown up again. This goes all the way back to Unit 1. It ties into, here's the bare chest. And typically the way we explained it was, oh, well, that means fertility. Well, Picasso has flipped that around. This isn't about fertility, is it? It's about death. It's about despair. Those early depictions of the animals about being protectors, right? Or sympathetic magic, or about power, about royalty, and the horns. Here, not so much. This is truly he's the aggressor, sort of this mindless brute coming in, stomping all over everything. We've seen images. Remember an image where a guy is on the ground and a horse is about to trample him, right? There's the conversion of St. Paul. Here, I've been given that again. Picasso knows his history. He's not without art knowledge. He's very knowledgeable. He knows, which makes any good artist knows their history. Every once in a while, I'll run into someone who's a pretty good painter, and I'll say, "Hey, you kind of look like name a painter," and they're like, "Who?" And I'm like, "Oh my gosh! All right, stop what you're doing. All right, you need to read a book. Right? You need to look around." I think you can only gain from it. There's his sword here has been broken, right? And swords, and as far as iconography are concerned, typically are phallic symbols, right? So in a way, his fertility has been broken. Certainly his ability to defend himself is ruined. She's running out into the night. I'm saying it's nighttime, right? She's half dressed, right? That's not normal. It's not normal for me. This building on fire. We've seen an image where a man is throwing up his hands in the same pose and sort of looking for answers, looking for some sort of like, where is the reason? You guys remember Goya, right? And part of the Romantic movement. Is that the 3rd of May? Is that the painting? Yeah, I've got that same. There's some borrowing going on here. And here's a person sort of throwing the light on the scene, exposing everything. And we see, as Picasso, in a way, is Guernica part of that tradition of tenebrism? And I would say, yeah. It's abstraction, but it's still about dramatic lighting. Just because it's not the same way as what we're used to seeing in Baroque images, such as Caravaggio, Rembrandt, doesn't mean it's not. It's still light for drama. It's really off and on here. If I look at the top, you see this eye shape up here, and it's also sort of throwing, maybe it seems like most of the light is coming from this lamp, but it seems to be blazing, and of course it can't blink. It's a painting. Some read that, and Picasso, he's not very giving on what all this stuff means, but the all-seeing eye of God. But inside of here, you guys see that's a light bulb shape. And the light bulb, which is a fairly new invention in early 1900s, especially. Now Guernica is a city in Spain, but in Spain the light bulb is called bomba, B-O-M-B-A, bomb. And you're like, okay, what's that got to do with anything? This painting is a painting of a catastrophe, a disaster. You remember Rafter the Medusa, right? You remember, let's pick one, the death of Sardanapalus, right? What you pick one? Pick one of those disaster images. This is a disaster image, except it's not, strange, right? Oh, why is this here? Well, this is completely out of sequence. Okay, yeah, this goes with, I'm not disappointed that it's here. That is remind me, that's Thomas Eakins, right? And this is the Gross Clinic. And this is the Rembrandt piece, right? Where they're doing an anatomy lesson, right? Fiddling with this guy's tendons here, and everyone's recording everything. And at one point I was trying to say, hey, it's very similar in its style, right? We could say Eakins is a Tenebrasso as well, isn't he? But Reed, are you suggesting that artists borrow from other artists? Yeah, I'm strongly suggesting that. There's a good example. And I believe I pointed out several ways in which Picasso borrows from people, but he's applying it to his own style. And to get back to my conversation, that Guernica is a real place, and it was really bombed. The Spanish government, or the people, someone gave Nazi Germany permission to have a practice run using their bombs and their planes on the town of Guernica. Great, whatever. But the problem is that they didn't tell any of the people that lived in Guernica that the Nazi German war machine was coming and going to bomb them. And so 1937, Guernica, the mural, is Picasso trying in his way, in his method, in his language, to tell the world, this was part of the Spanish pavilion in the Paris Exposition, that something crazy is going on, something illogical is happening. Guernica, why are people not, like, there's something needs to be done before it's too late. Don't let this be you, and this is a disaster. And it's not bulls and horses, it's people to people. 1937, Picasso was talking about something fairly important. And you guys that know a little bit about history, he was 2 years, as far as 1939 is concerned. That's when the Nazi war machine is going to work its way into Austria and then Poland. And you know the story, it's World War II. Picasso was on the forefront of this. Don't forget, Picasso's Spanish painter, but he spent he was in France when France was occupied during World War II. So he was not popular amongst the occupiers while he was there. So Guernica, interesting story. Now, who else can pull off with abstraction? Abstraction's a big game. What do we call this? Analytical cubism. Who else can pull off historical narrative, right? Iconography, tie in all those different things. There's more things going on here. But the point is that this is what makes Picasso great, okay? It's not necessarily, how he paints, or if you respect that or whatever, or the form or the style and all that, is that he did manage to do something new, but he also manages to say, hey, and there's also this history that I can apply these things to. And 1937 Picasso, Guernica, this belongs, this is definitely, put this next to, the Sistine ceiling, put this next to the Mona Lisa. Put this next to Las Meninas by Velázquez. This should be in your head. This should be one of the great paintings. All right. Okay, so it's about to get really weird. We are about to talk about some of these images. Listen, it's a lot of talk, and I don't want to talk a lot, but I just want to give you a brief, like, hey, this is why it happens, okay? So we're about to look at some non-objective stuff. We've seen some abstraction, got it. Non-objective is different, right? Non-objective art may attempt to visualize the spiritual and can be seen as carrying a moral dimension. What? Standing for virtues like purity and simplicity. We're going to read this again. We're going to talk about two artists. I think we're going to start with Kandinsky, and then we're going to look at Malevich, right? And here we go. All right, so we may have looked at one of Kandinsky's paintings earlier in the year, and we made a quick list, okay? And we said, well, there's naturalism, and pretty much everyone up until, what do you want to say, Matisse? All the group, anyone from 1899 back, we can say, that's naturalistic. Well, when I get into Matisse and Picasso, I'm like, well, these guys are actually getting into abstraction, which is the simplification of nature. Well, now we have to add to the mix Kandinsky and Malevich, and we're getting into non-objective art. This one here, I don't want to talk about that one, right? Because he's not really there. This is Kandinsky working in terms of abstraction. I want to talk about the difference between abstraction and non-objective, right? Also sometimes called non-representational. Now I'm speaking in general terms. I know someone who's going to get like super like critical and bound into these definitions. There's some slight differences. My point being here is that non-objective and non-representational art, such as this up here, are free of nature. They do not look to nature in order to simplify anything. In fact, Kandinsky himself calls these improvisations. He calls them compositions, right? He doesn't call them, Spaghetti Hill with, whatever. Like, I don't want to quickly try to make sense of the things I see here because they're not to be made sense of. It's not a castle and a bridge and stuff. That's just my brain trying to make sense of things that I don't understand. These compositions, these improvisations are coming from the inside. They're not things that are being collected on the outside. Abstraction requires something to be simplified. Non-objective, non-representational art doesn't require nature. It doesn't require anything to simplify. This is just really, it's based on free expression. All right. So we're looking at 1910, 1911. All these things happening in the early 1900s. And we'll get to the spiritual side of it, in that there is this thing called, it's called theosophy. And it's I don't know if it's a position within Christianity as much as it's the study of the nature of God. I look at it as a study of religions, right? You look at all the religions and you find the commonalities, and it doesn't mean you're not religious. You're very religious, but you're trying to scrape away all the rules and all the the historical mumbo jumbo that gets tied in. And I'm not trying to insult anyone at all. I'm just saying, like, theosophy it's studying the common threads that most religions have, that most religions share, no matter what religion you are. So this is a very philosophical approach to religion, right? And to understand true divinity, you've got to strip it away of all the trappings and all the images that have come before, and you want to see it in its pureness. Those words probably say it better than me, which focus on the attainment of direct, unmediated. There's no medium, right? There's nothing between you and that of you understanding the nature of the divine and the origin and purpose of the universe. As a theosophist, which I'm not, they believe that this divine essence, it courses through everything. It courses through you, it courses through me, it courses through this computer, in this chair that I'm sitting in my underground bunker. I'm not really in an underground bunker, but anyway, there's this energy, if we want to call it that, this spirituality that courses through everything. If I'm choosing to talk about this energy, this divine essence, but I'm choosing to record it as it is in objects. And when people come and look at my stuff, they're like, oh, well, you drew some shoes, or you drew a landscape, or you drew, a dresser, you drew your bedroom. Like, well, no, I was actually trying to talk about this divine essence, this purity that runs through all things. And I'm like, well, I don't get that. I see a landscape. Well, what must I do then in order to get right to the point? I have to get rid of stuff, right? Are you following me? I've got to delete stuff in order just to talk about the energy, because the energy is what I'm interested in. And there's a quote, it was theosophy that had the most profound effect on the emergence of modern abstract art, and specifically on the founding fathers of the movement, Vasily Kandinsky, Piet Mondrian, and Kazimir Malevich, right? And now you'll see that term abstraction thrown around amongst when you go and look, right? But I'm telling you that Malevich and Kandinsky, they are the first promoters, you want to call them the creators, of true non-objective. And you're not going to convince me the painting we're looking at right now is anything that's coming from nature. This is truly just color, line, space, its movement, its composition, but it's not stuff. He is not looking at things and saying, well, here, I'm simplifying that for you. It is what it is. That to me is curious. It doesn't pretend to be anything else than what it is. Malevich is doing the same thing. He's just going to go about it a different way. Both these guys are part of a movement called constructivism. But I look at them because of their interest in non-objective art. Kazimir Malevich's version of it, suprematism, the quote, supremacy of feeling in art. What type of art can I make where you're still going to get that supreme feeling that you get when you look at art, but it's got to be in its most simplest of visual form? I think you know where I'm heading with this. Here it is. Yeah, and then there's that big quote again. Now, that empty square is actually white on white, and that is an actual painting, and it is 31 by 31 and a quarter, right? 31 and a quarter by, it's a square. I don't know if you can see it on your screen, but there's also another white square floating across, right? Let's call this one like ivory white, and this one's snow white, right? How about that? Anyway, now if you're interested, I've seen white on white in person. Whoa, you got to see it. You know, when you see it in person, it's just oh so different. Now that time I'm being facetious. I don't mean that at all. Yeah, you can go see it, and then you can tell people you saw it, but you're not really, I don't know if you're going to gain from it, but it is in New York if you want to go see it. It is, that is the simplest. Can I get any simpler, right? I'm going to go out there and just, you know, I'm going to ask you, maybe you can think of something. Can I get any simpler in art? I don't think so. White on white, that's it. It's been done. Boom, let's move forward. But to go back to that quote, the non-objective art, right? Here's someone that agrees with me. May attempt to visualize the spiritual, right? These aren't my words. This is some pro, right? And can be seen as carrying a moral dimension, right? Theosophy, standing for virtues like purity, it's honest, and simplicity. Look at Malevich. In the 1960s, a group of American artists, including Donald Judd, why am I talking about him, embraced the philosophy of non-objective art by creating highly simplified geometric art out of industrial materials. They elevated these to an aesthetic level. Their work became known as minimalist art. What? There's the family tree. Minimalist art in the 60s and 70s has a direct link to non-objective art, started in the 1910s, 1911. And why Donald Judd? Because that's a picture of Marfa, Texas, Marfa. That's way out west. I have not been there, to be honest with you. It's unfortunate because I've seen White on White and I've not seen Donald Judd's sculptures out in Marfa, but it's a part of a desert town dedicated to his studio and these works, and you can just go out and about and look at them. It's very interesting. And you know what? There is a simplicity to it. There is an honesty to it. They are nothing other than themselves. They're not trying to be anything but themselves. I can get into that. I also find I've ruined White on White. I also find it interesting that Malevich and Kandinsky they're talking about the same things, but they're doing it in completely different ways. Check out White on White and how different it is from Kandinsky's approach, right? So this is nothing, and that's nothing. Now, which one is more nothing to you? I don't know. That is a weird question. I think I'm more into the Malevich version of nothing, because when I look at this one, I keep trying to make sense of it as if it wants to be something, then because my brain won't allow it not to be nothing. This one, my brain says, yeah, that's nothing. Hey, now, is this nothing? This is where people are like, get so like, what? You saw them, if you got to go to the DMA or if you've been around, you've seen a Mondrian, right? These paintings with the rectangles and squares and primary colors, verticals and horizontal lines only, right? He may get crazy and put in a diagonal every once in a while. Ooh, so ambitious. These Mondrian paintings are in fact abstractions. What? You mean these squares are abstractions, but White on White is nothing? Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Mondrian is also into theosophy, and he has come up with this style. We saw it in the Schroeder house. The De Stijl style literally means the style, right? He is looking to nature, and he's trying to simplify nature also into its simplest vocabulary. That is why it's primary colors. That is why it's only vertical and horizontal stripes. That's why it's also squares and rectangles. I'm not going to mess with circles, right? That's Baroque. I'm not getting into that. It's very fancy. He keeps it very simple. And where does the theosophy connection come from? He is truly searching for the simplified language that ties everything together. And so when he looks at art, when he looks at specifically religious art from all over the world, he says, well, they all use color. Well, they all use space. Well, they all use lines. And from this condensed language, from this simplified version of things, he goes, everything else comes from this. So, and he meant it. Mondrian thought, hey man, I'm going to change the world with this stuff. I have discovered like the root of all visual language. Here it is. Ta-da! What's cool, and this is what they don't show you in the galleries, is to say, hey, Mondrian, he didn't start off by just painting those squares. He was actually looking into nature. He's looking at trees. Look at how those trees, if we were to number these, right, from, my mouse doesn't show up. And if I were to label these, that's definitely 1. And then you go across here, right? 1, 2, 3. Here's 4, right? And then it works its way across. I mean, he finally is horrible what I'm doing. He finally arrives at this version that's become so popular, right? There is a process. He didn't begin there. He ended up there. I could say the same thing with Kandinsky. I could say the same thing with Malevich. These guys didn't start at the end, right? They arrived there. These are serious thinkers. This is, I think this is a painting at the Dallas Museum of Art to remind us that even in these early Mondrian paintings, you can see elements of where eventually he's going to end up. Can you spy here the verticals and horizontals and what colors he's using to make the windmill, or is it windmill? Yellow, blue, and red, the primary colors, and then this dominating sort of whiteness in the back. I dig early Mondrian paintings. I also dig these versions of Mondrian paintings. I like them both. They're both modern to me. And Kandinsky, he's got some different stuff. There are other guys, any of these guys, just to remind us again that Mondrian isn't making squares and rectangles because he doesn't know how to paint. He understands completely how to paint. He's serious about what the things that he's doing, and this is his passion. This is what he's trying to figure out. This is the new language that he invents. And again, there's value to ideas. This is his Distill style. This is Mondrian prior. This is an European Mondrian prior to World War II. Mondrian ends up in the States after World War II, right? So this is post-World War II. And he moves to New York. This painting here is called Broadway Boogie Woogie. Do you get a sense of what he's recording? Do you get a sense of maybe the traffic patterns or the blinking lights of Broadway? Or maybe he's in one of those skyscrapers and he's looking down and it's nighttime New York. And then you realize, this guy is looking. He's looking out into his environment. And he has created his own language of abstraction. His version of it is called Distill. Picasso's version of it was analytical cubism. There's different abstract definitions. I don't want to say definitions, but different approaches to abstraction. They're not all the same. And that's also what's frustrating when we look at this type of art, because, this bunch of squares isn't the same as, that bunch of squares, which isn't the same as, I don't want to keep going backwards, but the intent of the artist certainly needs to be taken into account, and it begins to be a big conversation. And not so much about looking at the work itself. But as we move forward, note that not one of these people is completely an invention unto themselves. There's always a link back. There's always going to be a link forward. They don't just stop. We may come back to that. I want to get into Jackson Pollock. I want to get into abstract expressionism, because this is really, if there's something big from Unit 4, is that we finally get to these other approaches to art. Because up until Unit 4, it had really all been different versions, different flavors of naturalism. And so we've been introduced to abstraction, different flavors of abstraction. We've now been introduced to non-objective, non-representational, right? Even there's different ways of getting that done. And then now we're getting to abstract expressionism, which is different from the other three. What's going on here? Abstract expressionism, to put it simply, and it kind of depends on who you're talking about, is the abstraction. And we said the rule was, in order to abstract, you needed something to abstract, correct? That's the rule. Well, abstract expressionists are, look at their label. They are abstracting emotions. They're abstracting expressions, right? Emotions, ideas, feelings, if you want to put it that way. Do we not all agree that, you know, love exists? I'm not trying to be corny, right? I'm just saying, hey, love exists, but it's not something you can like physically hold, right, or put in your pocket. Um, it's an idea, it's a feeling. And how would I go about, you know, if I wanted to make a painting or a sculpture, but I couldn't use words, I couldn't use letters, I couldn't use symbols, right? I just had to use, you know, line, shape, space, color. You know, what would love look like? What would hate? Would hate look the same as love? Would anger look the same as happy? And this really gets back into, I think that would actually be a cool assignment to do, is to say, hey, we're just going to use color and shape and line, no symbols, no words, no numbers. And I want you to like pick an emotion, you know, maybe yours is jealousy, right? Now pull that off. And then when I look at it, man, I better feel the jealousy, right? Because you can't just write jealous, right? Or show someone, you know, what does jealousy look like? That was a bad one. You know, show anger. I think I can draw anger, right? Someone showing their teeth or snarling or making their fists. But what would anger look like without the person? And all I had were the lines and the colors and the space. That's where abstract expressionism kind of comes in handy. It goes back to this very sort of basic idea of the psychology of line and color. I'm showing you two different images of Jackson Pollock. This is him working in his style. His version of abstract expressionism, also known as New York School, right, is called action painting. This is occurring after World War II, 1950s. No, Jackson Pollock did not do this type of painting his entire career. No. I think he only really did it for about 4 or 5 years. But this is why we know Jackson Pollock, so these are the images that we're looking at. This is the one, the Museum of Modern Art, New York. What is the name of this one? I forget. You can, when you see this approach, this action painting, you're really looking at a record of the process. He has left his, in a way, it's like his fingerprint behind. The evidence of the performance. If I'm going to get lost in the image and you think I'm going to sit back and talk about the image for, you know, even 3 minutes, no, I'm not going to talk about that, right? Because that's really not the conversation. You don't need me to sit here and explain what it is you're seeing, right? Because it is what it is. What we don't know is the process is really what's most important. The act, that's why I opened up with these images. How many times have we looked at a painting? Let's go back to Mondrian. Can we sit here and stare at Mondrian and actually tell, like, how did he make that? Why are these? And these are paintings. These are oil on canvas paintings. What's curious, though, is that when you do actually see a Mondrian in person, you really can see the strokes. And these are not, you know, perfect. You know, you can see the edges and stuff like that. They're kind of curious. But listen, this isn't someone who's interested in showing you the process of anything. With the Jackson Pollock image, he's really managed to fix the performance. When I say fix, I mean lock it down. Have you ever been to a show like at a theater, and I don't mean a movie theater, like a concert, like a live concert or a theatrical performance, right? And you go there and you experience it, and it's, you know, it's great to you. It's a wonderful thing. And then, you know, you say, hey, they're going to put on another show tomorrow, and you're going to take your friend and you're going to say, hey, when you come check this out, man, it was great. And then you go to the second show. Is the second show the same to you as the first show? Is it identical? Right? In other words, that moment of feeling that you had for the first time, can that ever be recreated? I know the answers to these questions. The question, no, they can't be. It happened. It's gone. Poof, there it went. Right? Like a bubble floating through the air. Pop, gone. And then your friend's like, well, what are you on about? Because, you know, I didn't really think it was that great anyway. Like, ugh, you know, I think that was super dumb. What? I mean, no, not it. It's just an impossibility. What Jackson Pollock is trying to do in these images is fix that for you. He freezes that moment of creativity, that moment of improvisation. He's revealed to you everything that you need to know. There it all is, right, if you want to see it. But his movement around, the dance, the motion, the act, the performance of it is also present. This, what we're seeing, is just the product of the performance. So don't sit there and listen to someone try to elements and principles to you a Jackson Pollock painting. It really isn't about the remnants. What it was really about is the action, the movement, and the gesture, and the moment of creation, right? It's kind of a complex idea, but that's one of the themes that makes these paintings curious and interesting. Now, I mean, again, if you like it, great. If you don't, great. I can't say as to, you know, I've seen some of these in person. They're pretty neat, but you do, I mean, you are there. It is different in a way because you can see exactly what was going on. Sometimes, I mean, it's a lot of painting being woven around. But yeah, the fact that he was there, his hand, you know, he's smoking, you know, his cigarette ashes are in there. Probably some of his DNA has been because of the way he worked, right? With laying out the canvases on the floor. You know, some of his hair or some, you know, who knows, is all fallen in there. So anyway, the other side of the coin, this is also New York school, abstract expressionism. Not action painting, is it? This is field painting. And this is Mark Rothko. And I'll let you guess which one is blue, orange, and red, 1961. Rothko is one of these guys interested in theosophy. Can you believe this theosophy? Some of you are like, what is this theosophy? Why does he keep bringing this up? I don't know why we don't know about it. I'm just saying that it's fairly prevalent in some of these works. And again, when these Rothko images, they're field paintings. They hum, they vibrate. They aren't about action or movement. It's about meditation. It's about stillness. And yes, there's this religious aspect that's embedded in them. And that's a quote from Rothko himself. It's a question. Is it necessary to create a group of intermediaries, monsters, hybrids, and gods? Do I need an idol? Do I need a picture? Do I need you know, a guy with a beard wearing a robe, right? In order to meditate and to think these thoughts about the world and being of the world. And meditating on sort of these, you know, deeper intellectual, which I'm none of these things, by the way. No, that seems like kid stuff. Like, what are we talking about? These pictures of, like, you know, what is that? Around. The point is that Rothko is taking these thoughts and these feelings, and he's trying to record them onto these canvases. And they're more complex. It's really about the ideas and not so much about the final image again, although they are the product of lining up his thoughts. It really is a different sort of an emotional response to, I mean, these are not the same feelings that you're getting when you look at a Jackson Pollock, which is sort of like this aggressive and movement and dance. I don't think Rothko is trying to sell you on anything about his process or the presence of him. If any, I mean, you can barely, you know, it's just not this. It's not the same for him. These are definitely the opposite side of the coin. They are meditative. They are still. They are silent. If there's any sort of sound you're going to put to them, it just isn't the same sound that this one is making. And yeah, I've seen some of these in person. I think you know, the big ones, they, I think anytime you're standing in front of something and it's one of these, you know, over the top, these are a little bit deeper when you see them in person. You can see the layers and layers of paint that they have, and you can kind of sort of sink into them. But yeah, of course, we know this, that color will impact you, right, in a in an emotional way. It affects your psychology. Colors can do that. So you're standing in front of something that's bright and yellow and orange and stuff. It's going to make you feel something, and it's probably going to be a bit different if you're standing in front of some giant painting that's, you know, blues and blacks and purples. There's no way you can escape that. Excuse me. So yeah, but you know, how long are you going to stand in front of these and one of these and do that and think upon, you know, meditative thoughts or whatnot? It's 2020. I'm busy. I don't have time for that. All right. So, all right. So we're nearing we're kind of closing in on the end of things. We're getting closer, getting into 1950s, 1960s. We're getting to some pop art. This is, hey, you know what this is? This is a collage. Hey, who invented collage? Hopefully you just answered that. Now this is Richard Hamilton. He's an English artist, but he's looking at who's his subject matter. It's America, USA, America. And his pop art collage here, he is looking at USA, America, and he's like, you know what, here's what you guys are about. You're about you know, you're kind of a consumer society, right? You're into like automobiles and billboards. What else we have? I don't think that's takeout dinner, but that's ham inside of a can. Do they still sell this stuff? They sell spam, right? Anyway, hi-fi equipment. Um, I get it. There's a blow pop there. I think that is like an innuendo. I've never really figured out what she's doing. Is she drying her hair, or why is she dressed like that? Anyway, it's not a very, I mean, it's poking fun, most definitely. There are things, if you know where to look, um, definitely sort of making, I think in a fun way, poking fun back at America, but also sort of maybe not so fun having someone from the outside sort of telling you what you like, right? Are we getting kind of tired of that, of the other side always telling us like, oh, here's what you think? Think, how would you know? How would you know what I think, right? Oh, I'm labeling you this or that. Well, you know, in a way, are we wrong in saying that, hey, we are somewhat of a consumer society? We are consumers. We do have a lot of throwaway stuff. We do like takeout. Maybe we don't eat, you know, ham out of a giant can, but yeah, we, you know, take out dinner or microwave dinner and things like that. And TV, sure, we love. I'm not gonna lie, I like TV, right? Comic books, sure, why not? I think, you know, hey, what are the big movies lately? They're comic book stories. And maybe it's not reel to reel, but man, we like the newest, latest, whatever, you know, cell phone, right? And there's this, you know, this image of, you know, I think that gets focused quite often on the female, but you know, I could say the male as well, as far as like your own sort of self-image and, you know, what's acceptable and unacceptable. And sure, things have changed from the 1950s, and we have a ways to go. No one's perfect. It's like I'm defending everything, but this is what Richard Hamilton, this is what he's trying to do. He's holding up a mirror to American society and saying, hey, are you guys aware that this is maybe how other people see you? Whether the truth is there, right, is for us to figure out. And I think there is, in any good joke, there is a thread of truth. I'm taking consumer stuff, Richard Hamilton is too, and he's taking it and he's putting it in the realm of fine art. And isn't that what pop art does? we talked about, well, we didn't talk about Klaus Oldenburg, but we did certainly look at this. And he's like, oh, a giant clothespin. Well, that's because he's part of the pop art scene. We talked about this in terms of scale and proportion, right? The scale of the clothespin, something that's domestic, something that's typically associated. Well, it would have been feminine, right? Because women would have been doing the laundry in the 50s and 60s, right? Now we have washing machines and dryers. Taking something that's feminine, definitely put it in sort of now in a masculine form, it being erect and up, right? Phallic symbol. Got it. And then also this realist approach. Did you see this coming? It's a realist approach and taking the ordinary, the everyday, and making it monumental, right? I mean, this goes all the way back to the beginning of the unit. Now you're thinking, okay, so where does this really find its roots? I kind of skipped over this guy. I'm just going to mention it. I just went right past him. This really finds its roots in this movement called Dadaism. And this is in between the world wars. Why is that suddenly difficult to say? In between World War I and World War II, there's a movement called Dada. And Dada is the first time that someone takes, and this guy we're talking about is Duchamp, he takes things right off the shelf, a poster, right off the shelf, and he presents it as, well, as his own, as his art. Now he touches them up. He puts a nice goatee on this poster, the Mona Lisa, and he signs this with a cartoon name. Here we have it, 1917, right? That's in between the world wars, right? That time I said it fine. But that's a men's urinal. He calls it the fountain. And he's saying, hey, I'm the artist. I get to say what's art. I'm the one putting this in the gallery space. It's making you look at it differently. It's taking the everyday and turning it into fine art, right? I don't need to make stuff. I'm the artist. These things are, he literally calls these ready-mades, right? Ready-made art. I should say not ant art, it's anti-art. Why is that ant art? Maybe there's ant art. That should be anti. I'm going to fix it. Boom. Anti-art. Creating art through destruction. Really calling out, like, there's a tradition in the art world. We talked about it a little bit maybe with Rubens, in the fact that a lot of the art that we've seen so far, I can think of Bernini, I can think of Rubens, I could probably maybe even some Rembrandts, where that's actually the hand of it's a shop, right? It's assistants, and Rubens, he's certainly putting his signature on stuff. He's coming up with the design, but is he really always the person right there standing in front of the canvas and painting? Well, no. Well, then Duchamp says, well, okay, so fine. So neither am I. I didn't have to, physically stand here and do all this. Someone else did that, whoever made the poster. But I'm going to sign it. And yeah, I did a little bit of touch up on it. Now, I mean, if that's one way of sort of understanding, like, hey, okay, here's what he's getting at. And yeah, is he having some fun? Is he also making some jokes? Yeah, but there's also something to be said about that. He's really stripping it down to its basics. Well, like, if you think that's okay, well, then you must think this is okay, right? And then the answer to that is like, well, not really, no. And then he says, well, by the way, isn't art a reflection of the society, right? Haven't we looked at art all year and said, oh, well, this is, because of this and, this movement, or, here's this history, it was a war and this is the type of art, or, the Egyptians did this, they're fascinated. We look at the art and we say, hey, this is what it tells us about the culture. Well, after World War I, Duchamp and a few other artists, right, have decided that, well, the world, according to what had happened during World War I in Europe, with mechanized war, with gassing troops, and just the miserable outcome of the whole thing, that society had gone mad. Society had gone crazy. And therefore, This is the art that society deserved. Ouch, right? Your society is crazy. This is the art that is a reflection of society. I am not changing society. I am holding the mirror up to you. This is what you're about, not me. So he does eventually, I mean, you get to some serious ideas. However, did Duchamp make this? No. He's making us look at it and think about it in a different way. I can go to Oldenburg and say, well, yes, he makes the sculpture, but he's not the inventor of a clothespin. So pop art, in a way, yes. Dada is also it's allowing everyday objects to become part of mainstream or academic art, allows then for pop art, right? Pop to do the same. What are we talking about? 50 years later, 60 years later? Pop art, its actual name is, are you ready? Its real name is called Neo-Dada. What? So in order to understand that, you have to know what Dada is. Now, I know some of you are waiting very patiently for me to talk about some more printmaking. And here it is, finally. And I never say this word, serigraphy. I call it silkscreen. It's apparently the same thing. And yes, there is this wonderful YouTube video where you can watch someone making a silkscreen. If you've got a t-shirt, I'm wearing a t-shirt right now. It's got a silkscreen image on the front. Basically the idea, and I'm going to do my best, is that this is a screen, like a fabric screen. It's being held in here with a frame. And there's parts of this that are blocked out. Think about it. For argument's sake, right? We're going to block out some of the screen. These represent me blocking out the screen. And so when I run my ink over this, ink is going to squirt through the screen where I don't have my blocking material. It's going to squirt straight through and get onto my canvas or my shirt or whatever it is that I'm printing on. And where my blocking material is located, no ink is going to go through. Okay? So just think on that. The video, of course, is going to do a better version of that. It's actually something that you can get into. The materials aren't outrageous, but if you're getting into that that light sensitive material, you got to get the lights and all that. If you watch the video, you'll see that I think that equipment gets pretty expensive. But anyway, silk screens. Serigraphy. I wonder what I wonder if that means silk. Anyway. So that leads us to talking about Andy Warhol, in that these aren't actually paintings, these are silk screens. And so we understand that this is sort of the repetition. Who knows what was, maybe the screen was just one bottle, maybe the screen was 6 bottles, I don't know. But anyway, it's repeated over and over onto the canvas. Can you even get away with doing stuff like this nowadays? I think in 2020 you'd get sued. Is he talking about USA America? Is he talking about consumer society? Is he talking about us, right? The Coca-Cola bottle, right? In a way, is this us? Is this as we drink these and we consume them, right? As they're displayed on the shelf, just like in rows, right? The grocery store being something feminine, but the art gallery being something masculine. And when we're finished with these bottles, we throw them away, we consume them, and then we throw them away. And nowadays we should recycle. Do you get Coke in the glass bottle? I don't get the plastic 2-liter. I actually don't drink Coke, to be honest with you. But if it's in a glass bottle, I'll get it. I'm having, we need to quit buying all the plastic 2-liter. Can you recycle that stuff? I don't know. You can recycle glass. Get the glass. How none of these are really identical to themselves, although they've been repeated. None of them are truly identical to their neighbor or anyone else like this. I mean, is this a picture of us? How we're all in a way sort of the same, but in our own way, we're all different? Right? Am I adding to sort of like your pop art sensibility? Like, okay, yeah. And it's linked back to Dadaism, neo-Dada. And I believe we started way back. Do you remember the good old days? This may be another Watch Me. I don't know what that's for. Maybe it's about Warhol, but this is the Maryland, the diptychs, right? A diptych, meaning a panel of two, 1, 2. And a diptych being associated with religious art. Diptychs, like triptychs, we saw the 3-panel triptych. It was the Miro altarpiece, right? The 3-panel piece, the right? Triptych. Well, diptych means 2. Anyway, altarpiece, right? Like we worship. Do we worship celebrities? Right? At the time, Marilyn Monroe may be still a top celebrity and worshiping, right? Celebrity, or at least are we interested in celebrity? And how is celebrity presented to us, right? We see them at the magazines when we check out at the grocery store, right? Stacked in rows, one on top of the other. Or is she the same as the Coke bottles that we just saw, right? Ready to be grabbed and consumed. And then what do we do with the Coke bottle once we're finished? Well, we throw it away. Is that what we do to celebrity here in the States? And if you think on it, like, yeah, we're real quick to turn on a celebrity when they've run their course, when we're through with them. It's kind of tricky to have, a long career and sort of maintain your position at the top as celebrity. We're ready for the next thing. We want the new thing. Oh, you've gotten old. Well, we're a culture that seems to celebrate youth constantly. Oof, right? I'm in the wrong era of existence. Anyway, who could we replace Marilyn Monroe with? We need a contemporary. Like, she's an old now, right? We need a new version. Who are we going to put? And please don't say any of the Kardashians, because for real. I'm thinking, well, who would it be? We need something new. I was going to say Lindsay Lohan, but I think she's even on the map anymore? Like, she got consumed and thrown out a long time ago. All right, so this is the end. And I'm not going to beat you over the head about, photorealism. But the reason I'm ending with this is because we started with realism in Unit 4. And we wanted to point out the difference that realism isn't a style. It's an approach to content. And some of it's political, some of it's about addressing needs in society, but it's definitely not a particular style. Whereas photorealism truly is a way, a way to somewhat compete with the technology of the camera. It's also a reaction to some of the other art movements that have come before it. Abstract expressionism, non-objective art, minimalism. Many people look at that and they wonder where the art comes from. Where's the ability? Now that cameras are a thing, people like to see that there are artists out there that can still, their technical ability is just so incredible that they can make images. I'm talking about painting and sculpture, by the way, that looks like it's photorealistic. And yeah, I did say sculpture. These are sculptures. These are Dwayne Hansen sculptures. Tourists, these are from 1970. There are other versions of these, certainly newer ones, and Dwayne Hansen's not alone. I think Muick is maybe one that we looked at earlier in the year where he was changing scale. These are life-sized. So they're placed in galleries, and at first glance, you're confused. And then you realize, oh my gosh, to almost walk up to it and to see it, they're outfits and their hair and their clothes. Just incredible stuff. I like the lady pushing the shopping cart. Do people wear curlers in their hair anymore? Well, not, I don't really see them outside the house, but anyway. It just reminds me of going to like Walmart, you know, and you're there like at 3 a.m. and you look about, you're like, what are all these people doing at Walmart? And then I would like to point out to you that you are also there, right? And maybe you should take a look in the mirror. This is definitely having a go at USA Americans, right? Americans like on vacation here, or I made a joke about us going grocery shopping. I'm interested in what's in the cart. This 1970 food in this cart. She's pretty much ready to check out, I think. This is, okay, to explain, this is a photograph of 2 real people looking at a painting by a real artist named Chuck Close. This is a zoom in of that painting in case you think, well, if you get closer, the whole thing will just fall apart. No, it's baffling. The painting looks like a giant photograph, but it's different. I mean, you can certainly, I mean, he is not someone, this is not Jackson Pollock and he's letting you, you know, reveal how he's doing things. No. Early Chuck Close, and this is a large painting. What are we looking at? It's like 8 feet tall, 10 feet tall. It's fairly big. I like to tie this back to the things that came before it. Is he a realist? Yes. This is a friend, right, of Chuck Close, some guy, an acquaintance, someone he knows. And when I take the ordinary and I make it monumental, such as a piece this big, right? And I say, oh, well, that's a branch of realism. Now, is he an impressionist or anything? No. Right? He's a photorealist. Is he pop art? In a way, yeah, he's an extension of pop. It's a reaction against minimalist. This looks like a snapshot from one of those a photo booth. Sometimes they still have those in certain places. You get in and you pay like $1, and you know it spits out like 5 photos of you in various poses. It has a cheapness to it, but you know, this being a painting, it takes that cheapness, and you're like, oh, it takes a lot of money to look this cheap. You know, when you're making paintings that are 10 feet tall. So very photorealism. Someone reacting, not reacting against the camera, really just embracing it. Now this is Chuck Close is still alive and working. He's had it's a spinal, something happened to his spine. He's in a wheelchair, and I think it was some sort of disease. Anyway, well, he still paints, although he's in his wheelchair. He has a special sort of device, a glove or a brace that helps him hang on to his brush. I kind of prefer, if I'm going to make comparisons, like these early Chuck Closes are fascinating. I'm equally as fascinated as Chuck Close today. I'm also fascinated that someone who has been has had hurdles placed in front of him has somehow managed to overcome that and has still found a way, continued and found a way to follow his, this is his job. This is what you do. I'm not going to simply give up. So even from his wheelchair, and these things aren't any smaller, they are still ginormous. I also like the fact that when I do the squint, when I squint at these, can you squint at these? That they come together. I've got that optical mixing. Now these aren't pointillism, but they manage, it makes sense. But when I look at one of these little squares individually, it reminds me of like, man, well, now you were talking, one of these squares has like a rainbow in it. Like, I don't know what's going on, but when I do the squint test, it just sort of makes sense. It goes back to sort of making sense of things that don't make sense. Well, this is done on purpose. This time when you do squint at it, it makes sense. It's not just a bunch of mess of color, space, and line. And this is really bringing us back. This brings us back to the beginning of the year. You remember this painting? I've seen this painting in person. I mean, it is huge. off the top of my head, I think it is at least 10 feet tall. And when you do get close to it, it is just, it's, in a way, yeah, it's a gridded, pointillistic mess of just colors that just don't make sense. And how does one know how to do this? And then when you back away, it, you know, it makes sense. You're involved in the process. I really like these later Chuck Close images. Not only for his own story, but for the way that they work. He has revealed to you the process. There's not really a secret here. But although you've shown me the trick, I really don't fully understand. Like, how did you know? How did you know that was going to work? All right, so I think we're closing in at the end here. This is the last lecture, Unit 4. And I'm sorry, yeah, this is a painting. I forget who did it. But this ends with a conversation, just a quick conversation about content. And really, don't be fooled at, you know, at first glance when maybe you see something that's, you know, or gauging success always by comparing it to photorealism or photography, or are you 1897 Matisse, or are you 1908 Matisse? Really, what I would hope that you gain from the course, if anything, is to look past the surface. Think about why you're looking. Think about why the artist is recording whatever it is that's in front of you. Think about why you like something or why you dislike something. Think about that your opinion does matter. And if someone tells you that something is good, you should question that. You should be critical. You should apply a little bit of your knowledge of form and content and aesthetics and elements and principles and understand what makes something a success. And look to images that not only tell you something about the artist, maybe they tell you something about the time period, and sometimes an image will tell you something about you. And then that's when you really know that you've understood something about the importance of art in your life, in our lives, in our world. You know, oftentimes, you know, it's art is on the chopping block. I teach students, and I hear over and over about their parents, you know, talking them out of, you know, pursuing art as a career or as a passion or as a job or as whatever. And I can't help to reflect on the fact that, listen, if we didn't have art, I mean, what are we without it? And for those of you who are like, well, hey, I'm still going to be a CPA or whatever, I'm like, okay, that's great. You know, go be an accountant, go be a lawyer, go be a doctor. You guys are nurses. You guys are EMT. Those are all awesome and great things, right? Police officers, all. But when you get those paychecks and they start rolling in and you're like, I'm sure I'm glad I'm not an artist. I want you to think upon where you're spending your money. And when you get some money together, where is it that you're putting your money, right? And I'm going to say within sort of some of the first big purchases, right? What are we talking? A car, maybe a house, right? Maybe some decent clothes. Well, who do you think designed that house? Who do you think designed that car, right? Who do you think designed your clothes? Those are artists. Those are all the jobs that we were all talked out of doing. And listen, thank you. Yeah. Thank you for realizing that that's where you really put all your money. It's in the arts one way or another, right? We're talking about the same thing. So anyway, I want to end with that. I'm hoping you guys are all doing well. Maybe one of these days we'll run into each other. It's always a treat. If you remember me, never has any of my students ever come up to me and I didn't remember them. Sometimes I don't remember their names, but it's not like we all knew each other's names anyway. But anyway, I'm going to pause here, and then we're going to I'm going to put everything up, and then I'll let you guys take over from here. All right, over and out.